Okay, I'm going to do a quick video on something that's kind of frustrated me for a long time, and it's protein absorption. I always hear the word assimilate used, and they often reference a study that says you can only assimilate 20 to 30 grams per meal, but I've never seen that study. I've seen studies that show you can maximally synthesize new protein structures from about 10 grams max per meal. That's really the only study I've ever seen that gave a definitive number. But the part that bothers me is that we use words like assimilate without any real clear definition of what they mean, and two, that we never actually extend things out to see what happens if what we're saying is true. And I'll use the example of, well, I'll say let's take an extremely high protein diet. Let's say I'll see people recommend, they'll say you need 600 grams of protein a day to really maximize growth, and maybe you do. But what does that mean? If we say assimilate means actually synthesize new muscle proteins, then let's do with the math. That would be 600 grams of new muscle protein synthesis per day. And so I wrote it out here because I like to do the math. So we have 600 grams per day. That's 219,000 grams per year, okay? Or 219 kilograms. And so if, times 2.2 pounds is 481.8 pounds of muscle protein structures per year. But our muscles aren't 100% amino acids. They're only about 30% amino acids. 70% makes up the rest. So if we consider 70% hydration and we divide it by 0.3, we see that's 1,606 pounds of new muscle per year. I don't know anyone who's gaining 1,600 pounds of muscle a year. I don't know people that are gaining 50 pounds of muscle per year, but we can do that math also. Let's say we wanted to find we reverse engineer it. Let's say we wanted to come up with 50 pounds of muscle per year. That amounts to only 19 grams of muscle protein synthesis per day. And you can do the math. 19 times 365 is 6,935 grams, or 6.935 kilograms, times 2.2 pounds is 15.26 pounds of amino acid structures. At 70% hydration, we get just under 51 pounds of muscle a year. So think of all the protein you eat. If only 19 grams of that gets converted to new muscle, we're gaining 50 pounds of muscle a year, almost 51 pounds. And so since most of us are struggling to really get 5 pounds of actual stage weight a year, maybe 10 pounds, let's say 10 pounds, we're talking less than 4 grams of the protein you eat per day is actually building new muscle. That's it. That's it. So if you're arguing for 600 grams or 500 grams or 1,000 grams or whatever, I would say, how do we argue away the 596 grams that we're not converting to new muscle? And how are we arguing that that is necessary or beneficial to new muscle growth? I would argue that rather than throw more protein at the problem, we would want to make the protein we are eating more effective at muscle protein synthesis. But I'll go back further to the 20 to 30 grams. And I see that all the time, that some studies showed you could, I don't even know that a study ever showed that. I think the Weeder magazine said that 40 years ago, and people have just been parroting it because I don't cite the study. And if you use absorb, some studies will say absorb. We absorb all the calories. That's why we have an obesity epidemic. If you could eat unlimited protein and only absorb 30 grams max per meal, I would just have people eat 500 grams of protein a meal, eat 12 pounds of steak 6 times a day. You'd be so full you couldn't stomach another meal, but you'd only be absorbing a couple hundred calories a day. Obviously, that's not true. But if we did 30 grams of protein for 3 times a day, a typical American diet, let's see even that. Can we even assimilate that? And we could do the math. If we did 30 times 3, that's 90. So that's 90 grams per day. 90 times 365, and you guys on your calculators at home can do this. 90 times 365 is 32,850 grams per year, or 32.85 kilograms. 32.85 times 2.2, converting it roughly to pounds, you get 72.27 pounds of aminos. So that's 30 grams. You get 72 pounds of aminos. But we know that muscle is about 70% non-amino structures. So if we divide that by 0.3, we get 240.9 pounds of muscle per year. So if by some miracle you could assimilate 30 grams of protein 3 times a day, you'd be gaining just under 241 pounds of muscle per year. So obviously that's not true also. This is just the math. You can argue whether or not we need it or what the protein's going, but simple math means if we're building muscle protein structures, we're taking a gram of amino acids and putting them into a gram of muscle tissue at 70% hydration. That's just the math. Do 365 days of that. I'm not doing anything other than adding up what you're saying happens in one day. And I'm saying what happens if that does happen per day. Let's extend that and see what happens after 365 days of that. And these are the numbers you get. So that's my issue with that. I'm not for a low protein diet. My guys eat protein. A lot of my guys are at 70 grams 6 times a day. I don't put people on 600 grams. I think there's far better use of the calories that you're able to eat than that. But I don't put people on 19 grams. I would never, 19 grams is all it takes to add 15 pounds of muscle, but we're not going to synthesize every gram of protein we eat. Most of it isn't going to go towards muscle protein synthesis. Some of it will go through normal protein turnover. You're recovering from your workouts. You bump your arm, you get hit with a baseball in the arm and it bruises, and you need to repair those structures. Your gut protein, the muscle of your smooth muscle, things like that. Some portion of that's probably somewhere in the range of 50 to 75 grams a day for most people. And so, we're already right there. If it's 75 grams and we say we round that 19 grams to 25, we're saying at that point, really, if you're optimizing 100 grams of protein intake per day, you're already able to theoretically build 50 pounds of muscle a year. So we're not doing that. So we don't know the bottom limit. We don't. We know that these upper limits that people are suggesting are clearly wrong, because you can't say this happens in one day and then say what happens if I do that 365 days in a row. That's not correct. You can't say this is correct for one day, but it somehow magically doesn't transfer when you do a bunch of days in a row. So those are the numbers, and that's my frustration with that. Is yes, people do grow faster on higher protein diets, probably because calorie intake is higher, probably because they never have to worry about a blood amino acid level that's low, because to synthesize muscle proteins you need all 20 amino acids available at that cell. If there's a trigger for muscle protein synthesis in this cell right here, I need all 20 amino acids right there. And the essential amino acids I have to have recently eaten in the diet. So obviously if you eat a higher protein diet with frequent meals, you're more likely going to have that case. What's the lower limit? We don't know, but it's clearly somewhere well below 600 grams. And I would argue that trying to eat 500 or 600 grams a day for that 4 grams that we're probably able to get. Now remember 4 grams is 10 pounds of stage weight a year. So most people are fighting for that. So even if we say 5 grams, that's 12 pounds a year, 15 pounds a year. So if we're all fighting for 5 grams, I would say there's a better path to getting that 5 grams of muscle protein synthesis than throwing 500 or 600 grams at it. I would say let's stick somewhere maybe in the 250 to 350 gram range, and then time our carbohydrates, do things to maximize insulin production at times where we know muscle protein synthesis will be higher. Why? Because insulin binds to the receptor and then it shuffles some proteins around in the cell, which basically like opens a drain, like in your shower, that allows amino acids to flood into that cell, and then the protein synthesis can occur. I would focus more on that, maximizing the amino acids we already are eating. Because even at, like I said, 350 grams a day, obviously, so if we do 350 times 365, we're at 127,750. So 127.75 times 2.2, 281 divided by 0.3, 936 grams. So even when I'm having people eat, if all of the protein was actually being used, they're going to be gaining almost 1,000 pounds of muscle a year. So obviously that's not the case. I want to emphasize again, I'm not advocating a low protein diet. I'm just saying when we use words like assimilate, we need to have them well defined. And when we use the words like we need or we benefit or anything where we're arguing for protein as high as 500 or 600 grams a day, I think there needs to be a discussion of what happens to that other 595 grams that we're not synthesizing to new muscle, and why are those 595 grams necessary to get that 5 grams? Perhaps they are, but why? And no, you won't hear anyone mention that. They'll just say that, I've had success with this, and then they'll cite studies that don't exist, or they'll poorly word studies that do exist. But no one ever talks about the fact that if you do the math and you're saying you need 600 grams per day, if you extend that for a full year, and then you do the actual math of if that was being converted to muscle protein structures, we learned very quickly that it's in the thousands of pounds per year, which we are not gaining.